Hello there, lovely people. It's Alex from Nintendo Life here, and today it's time for us to review Bioshock the Collection on the Nintendo Switch. This review was originally written by the stupendous Mitch Vogel and has been adapted for video by me. But anyway, that's more than enough waffling. Let's dive right into things. It's rather fascinating to see how the first-person shooter genre, which began as a mostly single-player thing, has gone on over the years to become much more focused on multiplayer. There's nothing wrong with this, of course, but it's a little bit disappointing to see memorable, narrative-driven adventures tossed aside in the name of deathmatches and battle royales. Still, this makes modern single-player focused shooters that much more special, and all three entries in the Bioshock franchise certainly fit the bill of quote-unquote special. Bioshock the Collection combines all three games and their DLC into one cohesive package, and it's safe to say that this is some of the best single-player first-person shooting available on the Switch, full stop. For those of you out of the loop, the Bioshock games each center around a dystopian society of some sort that has slowly become corrupted by its ideals. Oh, what a bizarre notion. Your journey through these worlds is one of gradual discovery, as environmental storytelling and audio logs fill in the gaps and help explain the events and layers of conflict that led to the place you're currently in. And although the gameplay is thoroughly that of a first-person shooter, combat encounters in Bioshock are generally a bit more cerebral than merely pointing and pulling the trigger. Although you have a thorough arsenal of weapons at your disposal, the real flavor of combat comes with the unique usage of these sort of specialty things that I can't refer to by a single name because, as far as I'm aware, there isn't one. In Bioshock 1 and 2, they're known as plasmids, and in Bioshock Infinite, they're called vigors, and they're basically superpowers. These games were outright lauded in their time for the innovation that they brought to the genre, introducing interesting gameplay mechanics and thought-provoking deep dives into philosophy that made each title far more than just another shooty sort of thing. Opinions will always differ on which game was the best and for what reasons, Bioshock 1, but we can confidently state that each one of these games is worth the full price of admission. The unique blending of plot, horror, plot, action, plot, puzzle solving, and plot is yet to be matched by modern shooters, and we'll now take a minute to skim over the important bits of each release, because it's three games. It's three games. The first, Bioshock, introduces you to the thrilling underwater city of Rapture, a place of high objectivist ideals that has fallen into a state of depravity and ruin. You, playing as some sort of person, you're not told who, stumbles into the city after surviving a mid-ocean plane crash. Slowly make your way through the dark and watery remains of this once great city, guided by radio from a mysterious man named Atlas. And it doesn't take you even a moment to encounter your first Sploicer, the monstrous survivors of Rapture's downfall, and their minds have been, should we say, slightly addled by the copious plasmid use, and who see you as their next potential means of getting a fix. Your cautious journey will also bring you into contact with the undeniably creepy little sisters, who are harvesting corpses throughout the city, each of which is accompanied by a terrifying Big Daddy. It's cheery stuff. The most striking thing in this 20-ish hour journey is simply how incredibly immersive the environments can be. Developer 2K Boston, later renamed Irrational Games, did an exceptional job of creating a tense and detailed atmosphere that shows much more than it tells. For example, pretty much every corpse you stumble across that you didn't make yourself has a story to how it got there, whether it be through audio logs or things you can infer from the surrounding areas, and it's that kind of attention to detail that makes it so easy to become enamored with the mystery and tragedy of Rapture. Additionally, this release sets the tone for the player agency that would go on to become a series staple, and the focus of this is evident in all the layers of the gameplay. For example, when you defeat a Big Daddy, the now defenseless little sister can either be saved or killed, and the decisions that you make in these situations will have an impact on the ending you'll receive. And then there's combat, which always gives you multiple divergent options for dealing with enemies. For example, you can destroy a sentry drone and fight off the other attackers with a wrench, or you can hack the drone to fight on your side and stun all the attackers with a plasmid while the drone finishes them off. off. There are some places where Bioshock feels a little bit antiquated, we'll get onto that more in a minute, but rest assured this is a title that has definitely earned the legacy status that it's managed to achieve over the years. Bioshock 2 then stands as perhaps the most underrated title in the series, as it builds upon its predecessor and views many of its elements through a completely different lens. This time around you play as Subject Delta, who is one of the big daddies that you so dearly hoped to avoid in the previous game. As a result, that means you get all the benefits of playing as this great big honking thing with a big drill arm that you always wanted to use before, and the results as a result are suitably satisfying as you would hope they would be. The setting remains in Rapture, but the narrative now focuses more on what happens next, after the previous title focused on basically exploring everything that had already happened. Sophia Lamb, the new antagonist, acts as an interesting foil to Bioshock's Andrew Ryan, trading his objectivist ideals for a collectivist approach that proves to be equally diabolical in its application. Who'da thunk it? In many ways, one could argue that Bioshock 2 feels a little bit more like an expansion to the original rather than a full-on sequel, but this doesn't mean that it's any less effective in attaining its goals. For one thing, the storytelling is much more focused on individual people and their emotions, as opposed to their ideologies or societal roles, and this focus on the more human side of Rapture is both fascinating in its own right, whilst also retroactively making the original Bioshock that much better in hindsight. Moreover, the difficulty in combat has been ratcheted up another notch to match your power jump by assuming the role of a big daddy and actually being able to use a plasmid and a weapon at the same time. I mean, it's crazy. The additional benefits offered on here via upgrade options and combat variability makes for a release that feels in many ways like the next logical step after everything that the original Bioshock laid out. Bioshock 2 may always live in the shadow of its predecessor, but we implore you to give this one a fair shake. It's a lot better than it gets credit for. Rounding out the package is Bioshock Infinite, which saw series creator Ken Levine returning to the helm and took the series out of the watery depths for the very first time. This time around you play as Booker DeWitt, a grizzled detective with a troubled past, it's already cliched, who's been coerced by his debtors into infiltrating the flying city of Columbia to retrieve a girl with the power to tear holes in the fabric of reality. Okay, I think that's where the cliches end. Much like Rapture, Columbia is a city based upon ideals, but where Rapture was mostly built up using political and economical ideals, Columbia is all about strict adherence to religious zealotry. There are many eerie connections to evangelism here, and we get to see it all played out live, as this is a city which is still very much alive and kicking. The commentary on religion and patriotism remains genuinely interesting throughout the entire game, and the introduction of new game mechanics like the skyhook and having Elizabeth constantly aiding you in combat helped to differentiate this release from the two that came before. Thematically, it fits in with the series very well, and though the narrative is still rightfully polarizing to many, the new setting allows for the writers and environmental designers to tap into their imagination in ways that the underwater setting never allowed. Of the three releases here, Infinite is by far the most cinematic and explosive, which gives it a unique identity, but without doing too much to strip away of what makes Bioshock Bioshock, and Bioshock is great. Though all three games positively excel in many ways through their storytelling, mechanics, and environmental design, there are still some ways in which they also feel notably creaky. For example, the first two games don't have an option to make your character run, and aiming down the sights of a weapon is something that you toggle on, and it's not something that all weapons support. Little things like this, whilst by no means game-breaking, do nonetheless require a little bit of, should we just say, adjustment compared to modern games, and they make things feel a little bit more dated and old school. We also feel it bears mentioning that none of these games feature motion aiming support on Switch, which feels like an odd omission. I mean, they're really popular, and they were in Borderlands, Borderlands 2, and Borderlands the pre-sequel, which kind of came out at exactly the same time. Again, it's not a huge issue, but due to the design of the Joy-Con, playing twin-stick shooters for extended sessions can be quite uncomfortable for some, myself included. As for presentation and performance, well, suffice to say, all three games perform extremely well regardless of how you try to play them. The target 30 frames a second barely flinches even in bigger and more complex firefights, making for a delightfully smooth experience in both docked and handheld. To make this possible, the resolution in both modes targets either 1080p or 720p, respective to docked and handheld, but it is dynamically scaled as necessary. Still, unless you're Digital Foundry or something, you're not going to be noticing substantial drops in any of your playthroughs, because I certainly didn't, and I know my onions. Sort of. Unfortunately, these ports, as wonderful as they are, they don't exist in a vacuum, and the games are available on other platforms and regularly on sale. What's more, other platforms offer exactly the same content in a more visually detailed way and at a higher frame rate. But as ever, the main draw with the Switch port is the portability. And whilst docked is absolutely fine and it's what I like to play, handheld really is a truly magical experience. Flying around Columbia and delving into the depths of Rapture is certainly a special thing to experience in portable mode, of course, but the high cost and dip in performance means that you should probably just think a little bit before diving right in. Of course, if Switch is all you've got, buy it immediately. Bioshock the Collection stands as yet another fantastic port in the Switch's ever-growing library, combining 3 excellent games and all their DLC into one very, very convincing and convenient package. Great plots, stable performance, great plots, engrossing narratives, great plots, fun gameplay, great plots, and loads of content. And great plots means that this is an easy recommendation, even if these releases do show a bit of age from time to time. If you're looking for a good single-player shooter or 3 to pick up for your Switch, then look no further than Bioshock the Collection. If you like your shooters and your narrative and you pick this up, you're not going to go wrong. Slap my thighs and call me Susan, it's Alex's personal thoughts time, and I love Bioshock. Back when Bioshock released, I was a huge fan of it. I think partly it was because it came out of nowhere a little bit for me. You know, I saw a trailer and it was just like somebody running around and they got attacked by a big daddy and the drill went through them and it was very dramatic and, oh, that's badass and edgy like the teenager that I was. And I thought, yeah, I want a big drill and to kill things, that'd be cool. And instead what I got was one of the most memorable narrative experiences that I have ever played. Honestly, it's one of the best stories and the best narratives and the best way of delivering the story as well, simultaneously by exploration and by, you know, sort of by non-linear storytelling, by the things of like the recordings and things like that. It's absolutely stellar. It is easily worth the price of admission, and the slightly weird aiming that took me a while to get used to again, it kind of speeds up too quickly. I don't know whether it's just an age thing, but it was a bit odd. Bioshock 2 is good as well. I don't remember much about Bioshock 2, to be brutally honest, from when I played it before, but I am aware that the combat is better in Bioshock 2, but the narrative does take a hit. I still think it's good, but I do think for me personally, Bioshock 2 is the weakest in the series, even though you finally got to play as a big daddy. Infinite for me is a funny one. I actually borrowed it from a friend back in the day, and it was a strange situation where I borrowed a game from a friend and they actually asked for it back, so I had to give it back, so I didn't own it on 360. I really like Infinite, and I really like the fact that they went with something very different. They made it Bioshock, but completely different setting and everything like that. You know, that I really love. However, I do find that the plot is not quite as engrossing. I think it's kind of similar to why I love Metroid. I find that actually, that's quite good. Bioshock is actually surprisingly Metroid-like in many ways. You're isolated. I mean, yeah, you have Atlas, you know, guiding you around and everything, but even so, you are on your own. You know, you're going around by yourself. You're the one doing all the legwork and everything. Bioshock Infinite and Columbia and everything, it's a very different experience. Still very good. It is very good, but not quite. I mean, lightning doesn't strike twice, although apparently, according to science, it does strike twice a lot, and my phone just went off. Still an amazing time. For me, ranking, it goes Bioshock 1 is the best, then Infinite, then Bioshock 2. They're all great games, and if you've been looking at this and you're thinking, I'd like a slice of that, then get it. This, honestly, some of the best games of yesteryear. Available on the Switch. I can barely contain myself. And they run really well on Switch, which I know isn't like an amazing feat, but it should still be celebrated. It should be, because they could have slapped out something quick and dirty, and it didn't run very well, but no. They did it, and they did it properly. Put motion controls in, and we'll be very happy.